It should come as no surprise to most people that the United States, if they don't like what you're doing, will find some way to punish you. But if you are an American business person or an American investor who happens to be living in one European country, your life is about to be more difficult because the United States wanted to send a political message to a country they don't like. I'm going to tell you the details. So here's the situation. In July, the US Treasury Department gave notice to Hungary in Central Europe, 6 months notice that they were going to terminate the US-Hungary tax treaty. Basically, this was about aiming to avoid double taxation and minimize fiscal evasion, as they call it. This treaty was ratified under Jimmy Carter in 1979, way back when Hungary was in a very different position and had tax rates as high as 50%. Now, Hungary has one of the lowest corporate tax rates in Europe at merely 9%. I don't necessarily believe from my experience that it is the friendliest place to set up your company for a number of reasons, even though the rate is low. People generally look at places like Malta or Bulgaria in many cases, but there may be situations where, for example, under the treaty, living in Hungary, having a company in Hungary could have been beneficial. To that point, Hungary actually had certain provisions baked into the treaty that made it difficult, if not impossible, for folks just to go out and take advantage of the treaty just for the treaty's purposes. So the idea was, hey, Hungary's a country where they have high taxes. We'll allow, basically, if you make money over here, okay, we won't tax it again. We'll allow certain exemptions and allowances and all the things that tax treaties provide. People can explain that much better than I can. But the idea here is, hey, let's work together to make sure that people who live in each place, doing business in each place, investing in each place, aren't getting sucked in and aren't getting screwed. No more. I'm going to tell you why. And it's not simply because Hungary lowered their tax rates, although it has something to do with it. I'm Andrew Henderson, the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We've helped over 1,000 high net worth individuals all around the world who want to legally reduce their taxes, who want to increase their freedom of second citizenship, who want to increase their opportunities. We've done that for about a decade now. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com how we can help you. And so the bottom line here is the United States is angry at Hungary for a couple of things. Number one, there's been this geopolitical tension between especially Joe Biden and the leaders of Hungary. Now, whether you like those leaders or not, there's plenty of leaders around the world that run countries that the United States has agreements with. I mean, they aren't speaking up against those folks. But they don't like the people in power in Hungary. They don't believe that other countries should be able to vote their leaders into place. And I'm not saying whether I like those leaders or not, but I'm simply saying now the United States is basically imposing fiscal justice on countries where they don't like the leaders. And again, if you're an American with interest in Hungary, that could hurt you. If you're a Hungarian with interest in the United States, that could hurt you. So if you're doing business between these places, you could get caught in the crosshairs of their political statement. They're also angry that Hungary has been among the most vocal about not ratifying the global minimum tax in Europe. So all these countries got together and said, hey, let's impose taxes on big companies. And it always starts with that. Eventually, it probably trickles down to the rest of us. But let's impose this minimum tax so that people, companies that are doing business around the world can't just move all their profits to Bermuda or Cayman Islands, what have you. And Hungary's been the one saying, well, why would we want to raise our tax rate? We're a small country. We're trying to be competitive. We used to have 50% tax rates. You were cool with us then. Now we want to be competitive because we're on a continent that many of the countries have said we're not going to be that competitive. Now, you are seeing on the personal tax side, places like Italy and Greece and Portugal that have very high taxes, open up schemes for foreigners to come because they know they need to have money. So compared to the United States, Europe is actually much more competitive from a tax perspective because you've got so many places to choose from. But on the corporate tax side, look at other countries in Europe that have been bullied to raise their taxes. Hungary has largely not gone along with this. They want to attract businesses. They want their own businesses to be successful and to have more money to reinvest. And they want businesses to come and set up shop in Hungary. And so people in Europe certainly don't like that. They've bullied Andorra in recent years to introduce taxation. They don't like countries that have low tax. They want to bully countries to play along. In Hungary, because of the politicians they don't like, they said, no, we're just going to do this. Now, do I think that Hungary's politicians are kind of screwing with them just in some kind of retribution? Yeah, probably some of that. I'm not a Hungarian political expert, but I certainly sense that there is some of that going on. But why does Hungary not, as a member of a great trading partner, a great trading bloc with the United States, the European Union, why don't they have the right to set their own terms? So now, as a result of this squabble over Hungary Again, the political issues, not wanting to institute a global minimum tax, basically just irritating the U.S. on not going along with. By the way, the U.S. is also not instituting the global minimum tax that Europe is wanting them to implement. They're implementing their own version of it, which doesn't even really solve the problem. And so the U.S., just as they have, bank secrecy, yet talk about other countries not being allowed to, they're being very hypocritical on this. And so now they're going to make it hard for folks who are doing business between the two. We told you a number of months ago, they also ended that if you're a Hungarian citizen, you have the ability to enter the United States for 90 days at a time under the visa waiver program. Now that is gone if you were not born in Hungary. So if you were born in a nearby country, if your parents were on vacation when you were born, if your parents worked overseas, forget it. Too much fraud, they say. And so if you're Hungarian, your interest in doing business in or visiting the United States should be much lower, because they've shown they will go to the mat to take your country to task simply because they disagree. There are other countries that surely they disagree with. They're picking out Hungary to make a political statement. And so my advice when I talk about countries that are flexible to do business in, flexible to invest in, if I, again, am living in Hungary and I have investments in U.S. companies, I'm going to have a harder time in the years going forward. And I'm going to say, wait a second, I'm already paying tax in Hungary, but I don't get the benefit of this treaty. Why? And so what I say when I look at investments is, sure, I'll have some U.S. investments, but I'm going to prioritize investments in other countries where either they have a clearer treaty status and they don't change on a whim, or I'm going to invest in countries where they don't tax my dividends, for example, or I'm going to do business in countries where they don't tax that income, because the U.S. is showing itself to be an unreliable partner to folks who, again, whether Americans in Hungary, Hungarians in the United States, or vice versa, it's going to be more difficult. And so especially for Americans whose tax status follows them no matter where they go, you can dramatically reduce your taxes, but if you're living in Hungary, this is a blow to that. And so you potentially either need to move out of Hungary or you're going to be stuck. And so in addition, not only if I'm Hungarian investing in the United States, but if I am an American who is living or doing business in Hungary, I'm going to say to myself, my U.S. citizenship is hurting me. It is making my life and my business and my portfolio more difficult. And so when I talk about places that are difficult to do business, yes, we look at the rankings of economic freedom, but certainly for a small business, I mean, the big companies perhaps can navigate this. Can you? And some of the big companies won't, by the way, but can you navigate this? So this is a topic that certainly, could have a much more broad explanation, a much more specific explanation. But the point you need to know is this. The U.S. hasn't been a good partner. If you're tied into that, understand that if you're doing business somewhere that they don't like, or if you're from somewhere they don't like, maybe your life and your portfolio and your investments and your tax situation becomes more difficult with mere 6 months notice. Now, when we make offshore plans for our clients, this is one of the things that we consider. We try and look forward. Obviously, no one can read the tea leaves perfectly, but we look at, for example, the fact that they gave everyone 6 months. Are you going to be able to move in 6 months? Are you going to be able to get a second passport in 6 months? 6 months is actually relatively generous for some of this stuff. And so if you're looking at living overseas, legally reducing your tax rate, you have the ability to do that. The idea that you don't have a residence permit, you don't have a citizenship, second citizenship, you don't have diversified assets, means whenever they want to change the policy, you've got 6 months to figure out something else. This is why I like to have multiple options. It's what we help people do here at Nomad Capitalist. And it's something that I think if you believe in the idea of international diversification, you should have a plan to make sure you have at least as many protections against this kind of behavior as possible.